Welcome to another episode of Sitting with Shay J, where we explore impact and inspire change. Yes, I'm your host, Shay J, and today we'll be having a conversation on resilience and mental health, especially tailored for Women's History Month. I am so honored to be joined by Marisol Solarte Urlacher, a distinguished trauma expert, speaker, and resilience consultant with over 2 decades of experience in mental health and human services. Not only has she been a guiding force fostering change within individuals, but organizations as well. Marisol, thank you so much for joining and bringing your expertise to the field.
Thank you so much for having me, Shay. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. Marisol, as we dig into this, we know it's Women's History Month, and so in honor of that, could you please share maybe your insight on how the narrative of women's health has changed and how it's evolved over the years?
Yeah, I think that especially related to mental health, there have been significant shifts in terms of how we look at mental health related to women and how we have started to move away from pathologizing women's experiences and starting to really look at what are the core issues, both in society and then both as an individual, impacting women's mental health. So I think more often than not, I think historically, and I think it continues to happen, we look at women as not whole beings, and we tend to look, and the messages that women get is that they're not okay as themselves.
Wow.
And so I think part of what's been transformative, I think, now in the mental health field is, I think, the access to information, the ability to normalize experiences that we can actually see, I think, through different mediums, through social media. We can actually see other people's experiences and start to normalize what it's like to be a woman in our culture.
I love that. I think we're having the conversations, and I feel like that's an evolving force as is, right? To be able to have this type of conversation for women who may be having some challenging time and challenging recognizing signs of maybe burnout or high levels of stress. What key indicators or signals do you feel like women should really be attentive to?
Yeah, I think it's really important for women to just be able to check in with themselves. I think what happens is that women have messages, I think, again, culturally, societally, that we have to continue to do what we do, even if we're feeling high levels of stress, even if we're feeling depression, even if we're feeling, other factors that are playing into our mental health, like anxiety, difficulty with sleep, insomnia. And what happens is women tend to push past the point where it becomes more overwhelming in their experience than it needs to be. I think what becomes really important is to be able to notice those things early on and to be able to ask for help. I think we also get the message that we're not allowed to ask for help, that we have to do it, that we have to be strong. And I think specifically, as we've talked about, for women of color, that message is loud in all different parts of our culture, in the workplace, I think in society, I think in our individual cultures and communities. And part of it is just having the opportunity to be able to check in with ourselves and say that it's okay to ask for help.
It's okay to ask for help, ladies. For our viewers who may not be fully versed in understanding what trauma is, can you provide a perspective on what trauma really entails and just some context around that when it comes to women's health and how it can actually manifest in our lives?
Oh, yeah, it's such a great question. I think the easiest way to understand trauma is when we have a difficult experience that overwhelms our capacity to cope. And so what happens is we can be challenged with a traumatic experience and our physical body doesn't have the resources, or we don't have the emotional ability to cope with it in that moment. And so what happens is we become symptomatic. We start to develop symptoms that are related to our unresolved trauma. So like we talked about before, anxiety, depression, potentially intrusive thoughts, insomnia, and some avoidance around wanting to deal with individuals or wanting to deal with different experiences. And so I think fundamentally that's what trauma can look like. But I think what's important is that when we experience trauma, it's important to have an intervention quickly. Because what happens is when it goes unresolved, then it causes more complication in our lives. And over the years, because we either feel like we don't have the ability to get the help that we need, that we believe that the problem is us, that the symptoms that we're experiencing are about me being bad and then starting to internalize that as shame can make it really difficult for people to get the help that they need related to trauma. And so I think we're having different conversations now, which makes me really excited.
Absolutely.
But I do think that there's still a stigma related to how we receive help for trauma, how we talk about it. I think specifically for women, it can become really difficult.
That's a lot of different indicators. I think one thing I love that you said is insomnia. You know, some things are just a small thing and we just think it's normal or something that's off in our schedule, but sometimes maybe we need to dig a little deeper. Yeah. So those are things that could be happening right there in your life. As they're building up tools and strategies, what strategies would you say as an expert, trauma expert, what strategies would you give women to really help get through this and make an effective way of navigating through their trauma, navigating, overcoming their trauma? What is a practical tool for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that primarily, obviously, I'm an advocate for seeking any type of mental health services or seeking therapy, professional help. If it feels like it's gone above and beyond our ability to deal with it ourselves, or the people around us are also expressing that we may need that help. But I think primarily when we're experiencing difficult feelings, emotions, what's really important is how we learn to manage and regulate those emotions.
Yeah.
So I think that is really fundamental to our mental health and our mental well-being. So it's really being able to learn how to name emotions, learn how to tolerate difficult emotions, and learn that we can actually express what those emotions are. And although that seems super simplistic, it's really key to being able to learn how we can move forward in terms of healing ourselves. And then it also helps us just relationally and professionally to be able to say, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm noticing. I know how to move through that, and then I can figure out what I need from there.
I love it. You got to be honest about what you're going through. Your support of the impact of women's mental health, I love that it's both professionally and in the workplace, like we just briefly touched on. Yeah. How can organizations actively contribute to creating a supportive environment within the demands of a professional setting? Because we know work can be a lot of demands. How can the organizations really help with that?
Yeah, I think what's really useful is being able, I think, as people in leadership and management, to get the skills that they need to be able to do that. I know I work with a lot of different organizations, and what I most often see is that leadership and management are really want to do the right thing by the people that work for them. Yeah. They don't have the skills to do it, and they don't know what to look for. So I think organizations can really look at building the skills and the training of the leadership to be able to really look at what are the signs that I need to be attentive to. How do I support my staff? How do I start to instill a culture that's really supportive of each other? Yeah. And to be able to provide the skills as a leader to be able to give not only emotional support, but just to be able to say, here's what I think that needs to happen, to be able to shift the, more often than not, the culture of chronic stress within a company and organization. Oh. And I think leadership and management have a really prime opportunity to do that, but sometimes lack the skills. So I think training is primarily the important thing. And I think more often than not, it's looking at the individual and not just the profit. It's how do we know that and understand that there's a correlation between productivity and the well-being of your employees.
That's real. Yeah. That's a real thing. We've got to value people. Now, you've also been actively involved in creating a safer space for BIPOC women, which I have to say I love. How do you really think storytelling, like your podcast, Resilience and Resistant, how do you know that storytelling really helps destigmatize mental health discussions for diverse groups of women?
Yeah, I think that primarily it's about the normalization of our experiences. Yeah. I think the impetus for the podcast was really about having conversations like you and I have, having conversations with groups of women who, we can just tell each other, like, I've had that same experience. Yeah. I know what that's like to experience microaggressions, to feel discriminated discriminated against at work. Yeah. To know what it's like to be a woman of color trying to continue to achieve and excel and having to work 10 times as hard. And so I think that was really important to me to be able to create a space, especially for women who have been successful in some way, and that they can just normalize that it didn't come easy, and that so many of the traumas and the difficulties that we experience really lend to our ability to achieve.
Absolutely.
But then sometimes we don't tend to see how those, our drive, our desire to want more, to continue to achieve, can actually be a detriment to us sometimes. And so I think creating that space for me was really important so that we could be able to have conversations openly and honestly, and then normalize our experiences.
Normalizing our experiences. I love to feel like I'm not alone. Ladies, you're not alone. Amid our busy lives, we know women were often struggling to prioritize me time. What practical practices or advice do you offer to women that are really seeking to have dedicated moments to themselves amidst all their responsibilities?
No, I appreciate this.
Because, you know, we get busy.
Because I get it. I'm there. I've been there. And I think what's important is to recognize that it's not about the time, it's about the quality of the time. And to be able to take those moments, to be able to sit with yourself, even if it were 5 to 10 minutes, has an impact. When we're experiencing chronic stress and we're constantly reacting to our environment, we're basically creating more stress on the nervous system.
Right.
And the more we can take those moments in time to be able to sit with ourselves, to breathe, to check in, to just notice, has a significant impact on calming our nervous system and having a different experience. So I always think like, don't overthink it.
Yes.
I tend to overthink like, well, if I could just get away or go to the
Right.
spa.
I need a whole hour to be okay.
Yeah, I need a whole weekend.
Right,
before I feel
literally.
better. But if you think about, if you take 5 to 10 minutes a day, that's cumulative. And really it's about thinking, how can I become creative? I do that a lot. How can I become creative about creating space for myself?
I absolutely love that. That is something that I really have mastered, that faith of it doesn't have to be hours or the whole weekend. Just finding that little piece of time is so significant. As we start to conclude this, even though I don't want to ever stop talking to you, Mary, so reflecting on your wealth of experience and knowledge, can you just leave our women with maybe an empowering message or some advice that you can offer to women who are challenging this mental health journey? They're going through these challenges. How can they harness their resilience and really not just survive, but thrive and really overcome to be in a better space?
Yeah, I think primarily it's being able to focus on ourselves. And I think that we tend to lose ourselves in the midst of everything external.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't even know what's happening inside of me. How do I really feel? What do I really want? What do I need in my life? If I ask women, like, what is it that you really desire? Sometimes that gets buried under the busyness. So I think really being able to know that you are the priority and that if you can prioritize yourself, that everything else will fall in place.
Yes, it will. That speaks to my mantra I live by. The best project you'll ever work on is you. So I tell people, do it intentionally. And that just really speaks to that. This has been truly an enlightening conversation and inspiring. Marisol, you're truly incredible in what you continue to give to our women. It's so uplifting. Thank you for your expertise and your insight. And remember, those of you out there, to prioritize your well-being, prioritize your health, and keep being resilient. Join us next time for more impactful conversations right here on Sitting with Shay J, where we explore impact and we inspire change. Until next time, stay resilient and keep taking care of one another.